Hello and welcome to the West Ham Breakdown podcast with me, still hosting, Callum Goodall, and my friend, who I've not seen or spoke to for a very long time, Jack Elderton, who you will all be very familiar with. But Jack, before we get stuck into it, how are you? It's been a minute. How the listeners will be wanting to know how you are.
This is very weird, isn't it, everyone? I've never not hosted this and been on it. It's very unusual, but it's really nice for me to come back and to have this like soft landing where I get to be the friend, I get to be the mate. Look, I'm really good. It's been really nice to have an extended break. The season was super busy. So really hard work over the course of the last year. Really pleased with all the stuff that we did. Actually, I think we did a lot of really good work over the course of the last season. But yeah, nice to have a bit of a refresh. Really lucky that from just purely my own personal side of things, that West Ham hasn't really done a huge amount in the time that I've been away, because I've been able to benefit from not really needing to rush back and get on top of things too urgently, but just starting to now, and that's kind of at the right moment because it seems like things are just starting to kick into gear as well with West Ham in this transfer window. So yeah, good timing.
Good stuff. Trying to think exactly where it was. Well, this time last year, you'd been on a similar holiday, right? And it was all very fortuitous because you were very close to where Julian Lopetegui grew up, and it allowed us to do a nice little bit of research. And look how that all panned out. So maybe it's good that nothing happened out in the Iberian Peninsula, because maybe it would have been a kiss of death for anyone that was on their way to West Ham.
Thankfully, obviously, I went nowhere near like Östersund or anything like that, so I couldn't curse.
Yeah. Thank God for that. Obviously, while you've been away, me and Darcy have still been hammering along with Charlie, and we've discussed a lot of stuff. I'm not going to ask you to give us your thoughts on everything that you've missed, but one of the key things I thought was a nice little icebreaker that we could do. We've been coy not to discuss any real names or transfer targets other than those that have been linked, and that's only been very brief. But what we have done is sort of explored profiles of players that the squad is maybe missing rather than individuals. And I guess on quickfire, top 3 sort of attributes that you would be looking to bring into the squad this summer that you feel are missing. I know people really do value your opinion, so I think they'll be pleased to hear the sort of key areas that you'd be looking for.
I think top of my list would be leadership and an ability to sort of command the group. You know, I don't know whether we find that in a captain as such, or whether it's more just someone who's got a level of experience that they can contribute, and that doesn't necessarily have to be an older player, but someone who's maybe able to gain the respect of the group quickly and play an important role quickly for us. I think that's really difficult to find in the context of where we are, but I think it's really important that we bring in confident characters, and that kind of confident leader type of character is something that I think we should be really looking for in players that we recruit. Second, and only marginally, is athleticism and an ability to make a high number of recoveries and cover ground at speed in the midfield. I think that's extremely important for whatever happens. I think we've got players that cover ground well in terms of being able to cover lots of it, but not necessarily many players that cover ground well in our midfield that can do it at real high intensity. So I think that ability to really cope at extreme high intensity in the Premier League is something that we desperately need in our engine room. So I'd be looking for that. And then third is really difficult because there are so many things I think that we're looking for across so many different roles. You know, I could talk about the ability to play out from the back as the first man, so a goalkeeper who can do that, because I think that's something that would help us a huge amount. I think I could also talk about a goalkeeper that can claim crosses and come off their line, because I think again that's something that would make a big difference to our back 3 or back 2, whatever it is, our centre backs' ability to be confident in their positioning and be led by someone vocal behind them. I could also talk about what we might be looking for in a striker. There's lots. I think what I land on though ultimately is someone who is really focused on creating for others. Someone whose primary focus in the final third, when they arrive in the final third or close to the final third, is to create for other players and do so at high volume. I think we have a lot of players that do other things really well and can do a bit of creative work too. And in some cases can do a lot of really good creative work. We haven't got many players that are really focused primarily on creating chances for their teammates. And I really think that's an important kind of player to have in the squad.
Nice. I think that all makes perfect sense and aligns quite strongly actually with what we've been saying while you're away, so that's nice. Final part of your reintegration, pinching a bit from one of my favourite podcasts here, which is On the Continent. If you're not familiar, do go check it out. They often ask when they're talking about games about what the perfect food accompaniment is for games that they are going to watch. So on your gallivanting over the last few weeks, would you be so kind as to tell the listeners what the best piece of food you ate while you were away was? Pulling the curtain back here, both myself and Jack are big foodies, so this is actually a question I've not been able to ask him yet either, so I'm kind of asking for selfish purposes, but I also know he's been away for a long time and will have eaten lots of very good things, so it'll be difficult.
That's so tough. That's really, really difficult. I had one very, very good confit and piperade.
Go type that one into Google, guys. 10 points if you spell it right.
Confit duck and piperade. That was very nice.
I do like that.
I also had a really, really, really good. I mean, lots of really good fresh fish, Portuguese style in Portugal. Yeah, it's tough. It's tough, but I think I do have to probably go for, my favourite of the lot, which is probably not the best answer, but it's the one I have to give, which is classic Seville chocos and boquerones, just
Very
fried,
nice.
fried fish, man.
You can't go wrong with a bit of fried fish. One of the best things I ate in Istanbul was a fried fish sandwich by the port. And Istanbul, my favourite food is kebabs. And the fact that I left that place enjoying fried fish was news to me, but boy, it was good. Sweet. Well, that's good. I'm glad you had a good time. Something that is equally difficult to do, famously, is assessing and identifying players coming to West Ham for a whole myriad of reasons. And that's just one of the things we're going to be talking to on the podcast today, as well as exploring the sort of gap versus, I guess, the competition now. And the fact I'm reading the likes of Bournemouth in that phrase is something that maybe a few years ago I wouldn't have expected, but that's, I would say, less to do with us and more to do with the rise that Bournemouth are on, to be honest.
Well said, Cal.
And then we'll get on to a bit of chat about the multi-club model as well, because I think that's going to be something that just consistently comes up throughout the course of the season as more and more clubs look to move in that direction. So that's a sort of order of play for today. We will be discussing in more detail the sort of difficulties with the analysis on Extra Time, which you should definitely come and join us for. We'll also, on Extra Time, be discussing two players that have been linked to West Ham already. Two that I'm actually pretty excited about in El Hadji Malik Diouf and Zion Suzuki, goalkeeper and a left wing back, one of whom would probably address some of the vocal concerns that Jack has, and the other of whom is a very, very good provider for his teammates. So perhaps the scouts actually know what they're doing this summer. But yeah, please do go and join us on the Patreon, where you can get all of that content. We do an extra half an hour after every breakdown pod. So that's patreon.com/analyticsunited. 7-day free trial. We'll be doing all the transfer stuff this summer. And as I say, we'll be discussing both of those links. And it'll be great to hear Jack's opinion, actually, because I've not discussed either of them with him yet. So please join us there for that. I guess then, Jack, why is it so difficult? Why is it so difficult to assess these players that come to West Ham?
So you're going to throw that question at me like a grenade, like an open-ended.
Well, I've got some thoughts, right? And I suppose my overarching thought, if I'm looking at it on sort of a more long-term, traditional, why it's been so difficult over the years, which kind of links to something that myself, Charlie, and Darcy did while you were away, actually, which was to review all of the transfer windows since we joined the London Stadium. We gave them an A to E grading, I think. I think maybe it was A to D. I don't think we had any E's. But you can obviously go and visit that on the Patreon as well if you want to find out how we graded those. But I think part of it is that for so long, each summer we go into it with a new mission statement. Like there's
Yeah.
not really been any coherence. So that makes analysing who you need to bring in, both in terms of qualities on the pitch, but also qualities in the dressing room. That's a constant state of flux, which makes it very hard to forward plan, which leads you to some sort of short-term thinking every season, which really limits the pool of players that you can actually go to because you're chasing the now rather than the future. And I suppose what's interesting this summer, even though we are entering a summer again with a new manager, it does feel like maybe if there ever was a moment to pivot away from that sort of short-termism, having someone like Potter in, with Macaulay supporting him in the recruitment department, with the links to people like Zion Suzuki, El Hadji Malik Diouf, like we've said, and the integration of many of the youth players that have been out on loan. Obviously, players reported back to training today, and we've already seen the likes of Potts, Earthy, Marshall, etc., all involved. It feels like maybe this is the moment where we start to do some of that long-term stuff. But I would say that it's still, because of the situation that the squad is in at the minute, irrespective of Potter, as difficult, perhaps more difficult than it has been. And I would be very interested to hear your sort of thoughts on why that is.
Well, yeah, I think you initially raised an important point, which is like, something I've spoken about many, many times on this podcast, and it's always important to come back to every summer, because it does really condition the way you can look at anything we do, really, which is continuity of style hasn't always been there. In fact, it's largely not been there.
Yeah,
we've really oscillated between different approaches. There hasn't always been, in fact, there's usually been the opposite of a smooth transition. It's often been a really harsh and rapid transition in terms of how we want to play. And that can really affect the ability of any squad member to make an impact, because players rapidly go from really important to not necessarily even wanted by another manager, and that makes it very, very difficult to plan a squad long term. It also makes it very difficult to have real, complete, lasting faith in whatever the new long term is at any given moment, because you're always thinking in the back of your mind, well, there's a chance here that if this doesn't go well, we'll go back to something that we know we've done well before. And if we go back to that, are we going to be signing players in this summer that aren't going to be able to help us much in those conditions? Or are we going to let go someone that we might end up needing because there's not necessarily an ironclad commitment to a clear idea or a clear way of playing? So I think that makes it tough, and I'm glad that you raised that to begin with. In the context of this summer, I think it's really, really difficult because we saw a lot of useful work done over the back end of last season under Potter. I think we became more predictable in a good way, almost, because I think where we were before under Lopetegui, I suppose, was an element of predictability in how completely bad shit a lot of it was. But it was helpful to know that defensively we were more likely to set up in a way that would allow us to have a bit more control and to not let games just fly away from us in a second. But at the same time, there's a big question mark over how much development there really was towards a more lasting idea of how to be successful as a team that, can also dominate games, score goals, and be a threatening attacking side. So with that, you feel a little bit of uncertainty / a lot of uncertainty over exactly what the idea will be, if there's a particular shape or if there's a particular way that we're going to go about things next season. We obviously have really clear general ideas with Potter. We know that there are things that he's going to want in his squad, but it can make it a little bit different or difficult positionally, because a 3-4-3 versus a 3-1-4-2 or 3-5-2, which is what we were playing a lot towards the end of last season, it might not necessarily be that different in terms of the overarching ideas and the things that we want to implement, that we want to try and dominate the ball, that we want to try and have more of the ball than the opposition as a way of defending, but also as a way of generating more chances over the course of the game, that we accept that might we might take a bit of a hit to in terms of the quality of chance that we're able to create. We're not necessarily going to create the same quality as really dynamic counter-attacking teams like an Everton or a Nottingham Forest, but we might be able to overwhelm teams by creating so much over the course of a game that we're able to score goals that way. So we know there's going to be an element of consistency in those things, but we don't necessarily know whether we need 2, 3, 4 strikers or wingers or what have you. And yeah, that does make it difficult in terms of looking for players. And also to push it on further, and I'll leave this to go back to you. It's just so much uncertainty over like who's leaving and who's staying, and without that, it's just really difficult to know. Now, for good, what happens if he's going? It changes a lot in terms of what we need to prioritize in our back line. If he's not going, then the things we need are different in that case. Same with Edson Alvarez, same with Lucas Paquetá, same with Mohamed Kudus. There are so many open questions there that it just makes it really tough to know exactly what the right fit is, because if one of those guys is there, then it slightly affects what I want in other positions as well. It doesn't necessarily mean, oh, we lose a left winger, that means we need a left winger, or we lose Edson Alvarez, that means we need a midfielder. It also affects what I want in the player that's going to play on the right wing or also play in midfield with Edson Alvarez. It really, really does change what we're looking for.
Yeah, I think that's it. And I don't want to go too much into this because I think it's something that we can unpack in extra time over on the Patreon at greater length and get some of Charlie's thoughts on that as well. And Darcy, maybe Darcy will be joining us this week.
Darcy joining us.
There you go. All 4 of our thoughts. What a delight. But yeah, I think probably to cap it and to give the perfect example of what you were saying there is if you do bring in someone like El Hadji Malik Diouf and Mohamed Kudus goes, then the profile of replacement you're looking for Kudus is very different, because you've brought in a really creative wing-back who can probably take on some of the creative burden that was expected of Kudus. Whether he delivered it or not is a different matter entirely, but the balance of the team is shifted. So therefore, you're actually looking to fill that gap with something entirely different, which is probably a good thing anyway, I think, because I think one of the biggest issues last season was that the squad was largely imbalanced. You had players playing out of position, you had players not maximising their strengths. Yeah, it should rebalance itself if we do things smartly. I think my biggest gripe, which is again nothing new, is that all of these issues are so publicly known that it handicaps us in the market anyway. Because clubs that we're trying to do business with are like, oh, you really want to get rid of Kudus because that's going to kickstart all of your summer business. Oh, but you need to do it soon because pre-season started. Oh, well, then we're not going to pay you the money that you want, are we? Because you're desperate. And that has been a consistent theme over however many transfer windows, quite frankly, bar maybe the one with Rice, because we were able to actually leverage that one somewhat to our advantage because of everything he'd done for us and how desperate Arsenal were to land him. But yeah, this summer it's an interesting one because we've basically put in the shop window so many players that we don't want, and now we expect clubs to meet our valuation of them. It's like, well, no, because you've just made it quite clear that you don't want them here. So yeah, crazy tactics. But as I say, we'll get everyone else's opinions on that on extra time. So do join us there. We're going to take a quick break now, and then we're going to come back to assess, I guess, the competition and sort of where we stack up against them, which should be interesting, if potentially a little bit alarming as a discussion. So please do stick around, and we'll catch you in a minute. Okay, competition. I wish we didn't have any, but we've got a lot. Bournemouth, Brentford, Brighton. Who else can you chuck in there? Everton, probably now with Moyes at the helm, which adds a great element of narrative passion to it as well, doesn't it? But people are catching us. The team that were finishing 6th and 7th and fighting on European competitions only just finished above relegation. And everyone's making moves, it seems, or certainly the teams around us. I think Bournemouth, Brentford and Brighton have all done some form of business so far this summer. And I think that's probably resulting in a lot of the frustration that seems to exist within the fan base at the moment, that I seem to be picking up on socials. And myself as well. I think it's annoying. I understand we wanted to get players out the door, but also there's definitely some positions that we know we need to fill anyway. Goalkeeper being one. Left wing back being another, given that Cresswell's gone. There's clear gaps that we should be moving to fill quickly. I suppose the big question that sort of frames this season in its entirety, actually, given how disappointing last year was and how well other teams are doing to bolster, is how quickly should we be moving to return to the sort of lofty heights that we were at before. I'm kind of looking at it as a bit of a tortoise and a hare scenario. Like, there's one move which would be sort of in line with a lot of how we've operated previously, where we've had a bit of a dip and then we invest heavily to try and overturn that dip and very quickly catapult ourselves back up towards the top half of the table. Or there's the other side, which is an acceptance that actually, given the ever-increasing quality of the Premier League, and even the teams that come up, really, like the likes of Sunderland and Leeds are also making big moves already. I think Leeds have brought in 2 centre-halves, one of whom we are a big fan of in Yacobiel. So everyone is competitive these days, and therefore I think that probably undermines the notion of just chucking as much money at it as possible and trying to sort of fill the qualitative gap. It makes it a lot more difficult, right?
Do you find it a little bit scary seeing clubs coming up and maybe seeming, at least appearing to be a little bit more serious in the business that they're doing?
Yes.
Because we've had clubs come up previously, right? And kind of not sign too many players that you would panic about. Whereas this summer we're seeing players go to promoted clubs that, you know, we would be thrilled to have at West Ham. Right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think if you couple that as well, I think part of my concern from a West Ham point of view this season, if we don't overturn our form from last season, and I do have an element of hope that we will be improved this season, so that's secondary. But if we are going to be sort of competing in the same area of the table, I think one of my biggest concerns is that when you look at the teams that come up, as you say, they're operating in a more shrewd way, it would seem, than teams that have previously come up, where it's felt a bit scattergun and they've kind of just punted on players that other teams have been linked to or that there's a bit of hype about, but without necessarily thinking about the fit and the long-term fit. Whereas I think, as you say, Leeds they've bought 2 really big physical centre-halves that a lot of teams are after, but there's a clear need for that, because I think if you look at how teams should be playing to stay up, I think you look at the trend of number 9s and the increase in physical nature of the league, and it makes sense to go, no, cool, yeah, we had a good season in the Championship, but we need some physical freaks to handle the level of quality we're going to come up against. So that's smart. Sunderland, again, like you say, I think Sunderland are great anyway. Their recruitment's been fantastic for the last few years, and I think the way they've operated as a club to get back up to the Prem has been admirable and should be a case study for a lot of clubs that are looking to try and replicate that. I think my biggest concern, more so with Leeds and Sunderland than Burnley, frankly, but that's not really offensive. I think it's just factual. But in terms of the infrastructure that Sunderland and Leeds have, as well as clubs, like historically, big stadiums, huge fan base, established clubs, ex-Premier League clubs, and mainstays, not just like yo-yo clubs. And I think if they're able to couple that sort of heritage almost with shrewd operations, there's a real chance that they could stay up. And I know you fall into this trap every season of, oh, well, this team might have a chance of staying up when they came up. But I just think there's not really been a club that's come up that has had that level of infrastructure that Leeds and Sunderland have, with Elland Road and the Stadium of Light and the fan bases that are sort of one club cities behind them. And that kind of alarms me even more, really, because I think if they do stay up, then they have such a strong foundation to kick on from. And that could spell disaster for the clubs around them, which, as we say, based on last season, could be us.
Yeah, it's more serious, or it feels a lot more serious than last season, when the teams that came up invested. You know, Ipswich invested in a lot of really talented players from the Championship, which did feel a little bit like, you know, we knew it was early for Ipswich. It felt a little bit like preparation for, you know, if these guys all killed it in the Championship last year, they might not be 100% good enough to keep us up in the Premier League. We're going to have a good go, but if we go down, we know we kind of assembled almost like a best 11 of the championship. So that we're going to be
Southampton as well, right? Like Nathan Wood and those sorts of signings. It's like,
Southampton
okay,
did a very similar thing, exactly. And then Leicester were just very unserious, I think, in the business that they did. And I think they also suffered massively from a big injury to probably one of the, if not their most important player.
And PSR constraints as well, I suppose. Which is actually their own doing from previous misspending.
Exactly. So, whereas this window, like you say, it feels very different. It depends a lot on what we do and where we end up landing in terms of who we're competing with. But it feels like there's a bit more pressure. So the ability to maybe say, responding really to the first question that you opened up, which is, are you chasing, or are you focusing on chasing to get back to competing right at the top, or are you focusing on just kind of like stabilizing things? It makes it a little bit more difficult to take that angle of, let's just focus on stabilizing everything right now and getting some young players in the door, fixing the age profile of the squad. And maybe we're not going to be at our best next season, but we just need more than this window to sort this out, because there is that anxiety of, well, if these guys don't hit the ground running, we might be in a bit of trouble. I still think the situation, particularly with the age profile of the squad, is almost so dire that we still have to do that regardless. I don't think we're in a position now. It would be different but I think particularly if Lucas Paquetá didn't have the gambling case hanging over him.
Which, frankly, we should say is ridiculous how long it's taken, and really is screwing us a bit this summer. But again, that's a whole different conversation. But
if that wasn't hanging over him, I think it would be a little bit different, because I think I feel much more confident about saying, like, we can just stabilize here, keep hold of Paquetá, and then you feel very confident that you've got a player that can take a grip of a game and be really, really good and help you control and win matches. Without him, it feels nervy, but I still think, with the age profile of the group, it's a necessity to just focus on making as much progress on that front as we possibly can in this window, and then backing the guys that are here to do enough if that doesn't pan out in the best way, with as many targets as you hope, because ultimately, no window you're going to have 100% hit rate. You're going to have misses in any window. So there is going to be an element of big pressure on players like Jared Bowen and Nicholas Fulkrug, if he's still here and stays fit, to really deliver consistently up front, to make sure that we don't get dragged into something that we don't want to end up in.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think I'm kind of on the page of, I don't know, it feels almost like a bit of a fool's errand given our sort of starting place on the grid, if you will, like to try and overtake as quickly. Like we're trying to overtake on the first corner, and everyone knows that results in a crash. Come on with the analogies there. I'm proud of that one. But I think when you look at some of the business that the likes of, and not even just the promoted teams, but Bournemouth, for example, they've signed Trafford, Jack. Your long admired left back target. I don't know how you feel about that one, apart from the fact it's smart business as a Kirkes replacement.
It's tough, isn't it? It's really tough.
It's really tough. And De Kuyper to Brighton as well, actually. Another left back target.
It's really tough this game. He went to Inter. It's really tough picking out. Like, I think one of the things that I am relatively good at is fullbacks, particularly left backs, because I've just ended up weirdly just doing lots of work on that over the years. And
one of them's gone to Bournemouth and one of them's gone to Brighton, which really, if you wanted any suggestion that you were good at it, it's about as good as it gets, really.
Yeah, and the other one I picked out of Club Bruges is I think he made the TFA like young players top 11.
Sace?
I think he made their first 11. Joaquin Sace. Yeah. So I think it's difficult, because I watched a group of young French left backs years ago, and I said at the time, these guys are really good and they're going to go places, and they have. Quentin Merlin's come off the back of a really impressive season with Marseille under De Zerbi. I think what I saw at the time under Kombouare, the fact that Kombouare was comfortable playing in midfield, the flexibility he showed, the ability as such a small player when he was young to play inside, the fact that there was this, increasing usage of inverted wing-backs, inverted full-backs, players that would have really flexible roles. I just thought he had an incredible combination of abilities to be able to fulfill that sort of job for particularly for a team that wanted to really dominate the ball. So yeah, Melvin Bard, I think, has come on leaps and bounds and still looks super impressive as a
linked to Sunderland today.
Yeah, it looks a super impressive player. Still, to me, looks like someone that would fit very well in the Premier League. Yep. And Truffer always looked that way to me. Just the energy, the fact that you can be a dynamo, just like up and down all game long, and how much of a difference that can make to any team. To have that kind of athleticism in the group, it's a really nice piece of recruitment from Bournemouth too, because it's a little bit like buying the dip. He's not been at his most imperial. He's not been at his best over the last 18 months or so, but he has such an incredible kind of base set of abilities to go and then repeat what someone like Milos Kerkez has done. That it's just, you can't miss something like that. It's too good an opportunity to not try with him. So, and then also later on, with players like Miguel Gutierrez and stuff, who I remember watching in Real Madrid's B team and saying that, yeah, he's gonna be very, very, very good as an attacking left back for someone. And obviously he's gone on to be incredibly impressive in La Liga with Girona. So it's tough watching all these left backs that I think have been really impressive as young players move on and do good things. And also with clubs like Bournemouth and Brighton and Brentford in the Premier League often recruiting these young players that you pick out and think someone should go for. I think it's really difficult from where we are at the moment. It would have been really difficult to catch up to where they were last season, never mind now that they're able to kind of go on and build layers. Yeah. And I know that it's not as simple as that, because these clubs sell too. João Pedro's gone from Brighton. Brentford have lost, they've lost Flecken, but they're probably going to lose one or two others. Norgard looks like he's going to go. I think Mbeumo might end up leaving as well, although that seems unclear at the moment. And obviously Bournemouth have lost Kerkez and Howson, so it's not necessarily the case that they're just building on top of what they already had.
Brentford lost their manager as well, didn't they?
Yeah, it would be untrue to suggest these teams are just always getting better. But it's tough to match pace with that when the issues are always just they're so numerous. There's so many things to fix all at once. To think, how are we going to get into a position where it's as simple as going out and looking for a young player who's excelling in a position that we've been fortunate enough to sell someone because they've done so well for us to maintain the level that we're at or try and improve. That just seems so far away from where we are.
Yeah, it's daunting, isn't it? It's a daunting task, but I think, I suppose my hope for this, the hope for this season is that we finish in the top four. Obviously, every season it's the hope, but it's the hope that kills you.
You'd like to win it.
Well, yeah, sod it, why not? But I suppose with my realistic head on, I think, I think you see who goes, you see who you get out, and I think you do. Hopefully, with the likes of Macaulay in, and he's made additions to the scouting team as well. I think we brought in an Italian scout who's presumably had some connection to the Suzuki links, one would assume. Plenty of talent out there as well. So I think you basically have to commit to somewhat of a squad overhaul, but done in a different way to usual, and just accept that actually we're not aiming for 7th this season. We're aiming for 12th. We're aiming to stabilise, reduce the squad age, bring in players with a sort of different time horizon who maybe are going to reach their peak at West Ham rather than arrive at West Ham in their peak, which means that when you go to have to sell them when it hasn't worked out at West Ham, you can actually go, oh, well, it might work out at your club, so you should still give us a bit of money and we won't make a loss on him, rather than, I'm not saying Ward-Prowse has been a failure, but someone like that you bring in at the peak in the hope that he can catapult you up that next level. And what actually happens is that you bring in a succession of managers who don't really capitalise on what his biggest strengths are, and you plummet down the table, and you're sort of open-armed looking at other clubs going, hey, does anyone want this 30-something-year-old midfielder? And do you want to give us 30 million for him? They all go, no way. And then you've got no money to reinvest. So I think it's for me a sort of, and it's funny because we said transitional year so many times over all the seasons, it feels, but I think this is the one that you've got the right guy at the helm now, it feels, to oversee that transition if you support him. And I think, yeah, if your aim is not to necessarily overtake Bournemouth and Brighton and the likes who are going to be pushing for Europe this season, but it's actually just to finish 4 spaces ahead of where we finished last season, then I think that's okay. And I think you can commit to the risk of an El Hadji Malikchev and a risk of a 22-year-old midfielder that brings a bit of verve to that midfield. Whereas I think if you were trying to springboard from 16th or wherever it was we finished all the way up to 7th, then you do have to go and spend a Kudus amount of money or an Alvarez amount of money or a Paquetá amount of money. And I just don't think that's wise at the minute when you've got all these clubs doing smart business around you, because I think the likelihood of you actually being able to pull off that transition and leapfrog all of these teams who are already steps ahead of you in the race is just crazy. I think you just have to reduce the gap between you and them, and then maybe next season the foundations are stronger to build from.
Yeah, typically with any question that's initially posed with 2 options, an XY question, I think ultimately the answer is probably
Z.
Z, yeah, which is probably for me that it's not aimed to catch up, not aimed to stay up as such. I think it's probably more just like how many young players can we bed in. That's it.
Get our own house in order, basically. Almost put the blinkers on and go, whatever anyone else is doing around us doesn't matter. We're running a shit show at the moment, and let's just level it all out and then take the blinkers off next season and see where we're at. As long as we're not 18th, then it's fine.
Yeah, just entirely focus on ourselves and do as much good work as we can to put the squad in a place where, even if every young player we sign doesn't come up to the level that we hope, and it's very likely that many of them won't if we sign lots of young players, because it's impossible to get everyone right. One of the strengths of Brighton's system is that it's not just the one guy that they're lumping in on, but there's so many guys there as options in any given position. Is going to be just to try and give as many of those young players an opportunity, and then if they don't come up to the level, the benefit is that like an Edemilson Fernandez or an Ashley Fletcher or a Flynn Downs, if it doesn't 100% work out, there's still going to be someone there who's going to want to give that a go themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. And I suppose a benefit that we don't have that a lot of clubs do is that sometimes you can sell them to your own clubs, because multi-club models are on the rise, and we don't have them. So we're going to put in another break there, and then Jack and I will come back to discuss what I imagine will probably be more of a philosophical discussion on the multi-club ownership model, and then what we think.
It's all going wrong. It's all going wrong.
So yeah, come back for us bitching and moaning for another 15 minutes about the monopolisation of talent in football and the parallels between Thames Water. No, it won't be that boring, but there are some. Multi-clubs, everyone's heard of them by now. There's been hundreds of podcasts on them, but I don't think we've really discussed them at great length, Jack.
Well, I think we chatted about it a little bit before I left, and I've just come back and gone, let's talk about that again.
Yeah. He spent 6 weeks stewing over the disgusting model that is taking over football. Yeah, and I mean, it's been in the news, hasn't it? It's been in the news while you've been away, because Eagle Football Holdings is on fire, isn't it? It's all
well, that's what I was going to say. That I think so many examples of multi-club across the Premier League and the Championship now. So many examples of multi-club benefiting so many teams, helping teams to grow at a much faster rate. Then we've seen this sort of period maybe where it's been harder to grow rapidly for teams that are outside of an established core that you could kind of rely on finishing in that top 6, even if they were terrible. And then we've had this sort of quite funny season where teams that you thought would finish up there have finished down near the bottom, and teams that you would expect based on their name to be finishing somewhere down near the bottom have been finishing much higher up the table. And I think a lot of that is enabled by the speed that you can get in terms of your development via MCGs and or being part of an MCG. And so, yeah, so many examples where it's working so well, and just so brilliant to see John Textor having such a bad day at the heart of this wonderful moment for MCGs.
Yes.
There's one guy who's just not getting. Well, it's just not worked out at all.
Yeah, it's all gone to shit, hasn't it? Bless him. Actually, not bless him, because everything I've read is that he's a massive knobhead. So you know what? Bad things happen to bad
Could
people.
happen to a better person.
Yeah. Although I'll say I feel bad for Palace fans. I hope they get into Europe because
Yeah.
they are a good club. Amongst a lot of clubs that I don't like, they feel like a good community club. They get it.
I'm well in for Steve Parish, for just not letting that happen.
Yeah, exactly. Peak for Leon, however. Alex Franco, if you're listening, sorry, bro.
Pretty terrible for the rest of Eagle football.
Yeah, just chaos. But yeah, I suppose. I mean, like I said, I think this is probably just going to be more of a chat. But I know that I have on occasion thought about the possibility of West Ham being a multi-club model, mainly just because that's where it's going, right? And I think the main question is, do you have to be one to beat one now? That's kind of where we're at. If everyone's doing it and Bournemouth are going above you because they've got Lorient and did they just get another club? Was it Hibs they picked up?
Yeah, Auckland City as well.
Exactly. Brighton have obviously catapulted themselves up. They've got USG over in Belgium who have been kicking up a storm. I think they even won the league last season. They've just sorted something out with Hearts in Scotland, which seems to be a market that investors are really looking into at the minute. Yeah. Leeds obviously getting involved with Rangers as well. Then on top of that, Brighton have obviously got their own data side with Star Lizard as well. Likewise, Brentford benefit from a similar relationship with a data company in Smart Odds and their partner club Midtjylland. So all of these clubs around us that we're sort of increasingly in competition with all have one thing over us, which is that they have several clubs that they can store talent at, they can develop talent at, they can give experience to young players across the continent in European competitions, and benefit from some funky finances at times as well. I mean, we were quoted, 40 million was it for Eli Krupi, something like that, and then Bournemouth picked him up for 10 million the next week because he was at their partner club. So you do get that benefit when you land on a banger as well, because then you can just sell them upstream at a fraction of the cost that it would cost you to go and find an equivalent talent. So that's a huge sort of differentiating factor in these sort of markets as well. So yeah, I've definitely had that thought about, who would be a good fit. Obviously, there's the Sparta Prague link with Kretinsky being in there. But I think ultimately, as much as I think it would give us a competitive advantage, or not even an advantage, it would just level the playing field as people move in this direction. But from just a fundamental point of view, I hate it. So I actually quite like, for once, West Ham being the good guys in this scenario. Like, this is what happens, right, when you just open up the market to a bunch of hedge fund managers. They come in and go, let me pick up that community institution, turn it into a corporate asset, and hoover up a bunch of subsidiaries. That's just what they do with corporates, right? They're going, I'm going to buy this pharmaceutical company and then I'm going to hoover up all the competition, and lo and behold, now there's no competition. And that's what's happening in football. And I think it feels for once like my politics kind of align with West Ham in a way, because we're not doing all the horrible corporate privatization bollocks. We're actually sticking steadfastly to our roots, which is great, because generally
by luck more than judgment, I would suggest.
Yeah.
Ifenyi Uber FC, Triple V Venlo, Austria Klagenfurt.
Yeah, it's almost like we've tried to do it, but once again, we've just been so shit compared to everyone else that was like, hey, these guys are doing this thing where they pick up a good club, bro. Pick up a club that actually offers you something, not some random Nigerian club that I'm not even sure exists anymore. Like,
I don't think it does. It's, unfortunately, Senator Ifenyuba is not around anymore, so not sure if the football club's going. Yeah, it's been funny, hasn't it, to watch our kind of inept attempts at trying to develop our own MCG. God knows really what it looks like going forward. I open this up as a question because I think, Charlie made a really interesting point when I was putting stuff down on the plan for this podcast, things that I wanted to speak about coming back. And I was, I wanted to speak really about Bournemouth, Brighton and Brentford, which are the teams you've been talking about,
Yeah.
and how difficult it might be to maintain pace. And Charlie, the first thing Charlie said was, yeah, but when like Southampton were in the Premier League, they were doing that thing of like signing young players, of developing young players, selling them on to the big clubs in order to continue with that model. And eventually they came a cropper, right? Like they got it wrong over a couple of windows, and they ended up going down, and they haven't really properly recovered since. And I thought that was a really key point, and it brought me straight to MCGs, which is why I ended up putting it on the plan, which is it's just not the same anymore. That vision of what it was like to try with that model is nowhere near what it is now, because rather than having a squad of 20, 25, 30, however many it is, usually 20 to 25, and therefore relying on every single time you sell that player that's developed really well with you and gone on to be good enough to go to a bigger club, you need someone just incredibly good at that moment who's going to be just as strong over the next couple of years. Now you've got 8, 9, 10 guys developing in any given position at 8, 9, 10 different bloody clubs. It's just a completely different situation. You've got so many options. And Brighton have done this so unbelievably successfully, probably more so than anyone else. And they continue to be incredibly aggressive in the way that they operate, just hoovering up unbelievable numbers of players so that they're able to really spread their bet. They're able to gamble on so many players that, law of averages suggests that when you sign 10 of the best under 21 wingers, one of them is going to turn out to be really bloody good.
And you only need one of them to be good, because as soon as you sell that one player, it offsets the 9 dead moves, because all of that money is swallowed up by the asset that you've just sold, and then you start again. You start the process again. So Brighton don't have that many duds that you're aware of, but I'm sure if you went through with a fine-tooth comb and went and looked at every single purchase, there's probably so many players, but they probably only spent a few 100,000 or a couple of million on them, and then you sell Moises Caicedo and it's like, oh look, all of those bums that we signed don't matter anymore. And even ones that got away as well, right? Like Gyökeres is the obvious one at the minute that they let away, and I'm sure they probably look and go, damn, we probably could have held on to him for a bit longer, but it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. And I'm sure they'll get some sort of solidarity payment or contribution or percentage of the profit, etc., that sort of thing that they will have put in. And even players like Leo Ostergaard was at Brighton. He played for Napoli, played in France, good centre back, very good in the air, but doesn't matter because they also had Van Paul Hecker coming through. So it doesn't they've got an embarrassment of riches, but done really, really well, rather than Man United spending hundreds of millions on bums and not being able to flip them.
The best comparison I think I can give you, because I know we want to do this quickly and then we're going to head over to extra time. We'll probably have a bit more of this conversation over there, is the difference between us and Brighton when it comes to young players. I think is captured perfectly through like Louis Guilherme for us, and the risk and the amount of money and how important it is that he actually turns out to be really, really good, because we need him to turn out to be really, really good. Whereas Brighton have on the books between themselves and USG, and this is without looking at their youth team as well, because there'll be more in the youth team. They have Kaoru Mitoma, Simon Adingra, Ibrahim Osman, Abdallah Sima, Tom Watson, Jeremy Sarmiento, Yankuba Minter, Brian Gruder, Solly March, Do Young Yoon, Jorginho Rutter. At USG, Usain Yang, Sofiane Boufal, Henok Teklab, Anan Kalaili, Raul Florux, Franjo Ivanovic, and then last season, having just recently left, that Casper Terho, Mamadou Traore, and Souleymane Baradi, all options in the wide positions. All, the vast majority of those under the age of 23, and even beyond that, the vast majority of those under the age of 21. So when you've got that many choices, it's much, much easier. Yeah.
Well, that's the infrastructure, isn't it? It's a combination of things, isn't it? But it is that infrastructure of having access to all those, having a much wider scouting network, presumably, than we have, because they're I don't even think we'd know that half of these players existed, let alone take the gamble of 500k to just bring them in and be willing for it to go wrong. Because I think everything has to work for us. We're sort of hand to mouth almost in that respect. Then also I think the risk to actually give these players minutes as well, which probably comes at what your ambitions are in the league. If consistently we've thought we need to crack top 6, top 7, we're not really going to bank on an 18-year-old and give them thousands of minutes a season to get us there. We're going to go, no, we need to go and buy a Kudus. Whereas I think they can be like, well, actually, we're going to try and gradually creep there. And in the process, we're going to give 2,000 minutes to Simon Adingra, who I suppose is probably our Louis Guilherme equivalent, but just we haven't been able to bed him in at all because we've not been aligned on sort of where we're heading. And I suppose, I guess to land on maybe a scary note, but something that is worth flagging is that of the teams that were at the bottom or around the bottom, sort of competing with us to stay up last season, you had us, Everton, Wolves, Spurs, United. Obviously, we're not a multi-club. Wolves aren't a multi-club and Spurs aren't a multi-club. Man United haven't been a multi-club historically and neither have Everton. But Man United are now, and Everton are as of very recently, with the link to Roma. So all that is to say that it was already heading in that direction, and now even more of our competition are heading in that direction. And Wolves, I would add a caveat, because whilst they're not a multi-club, they're basically run by an agent who has his finger in several clubs anyway. Yep. And they have access to players in different ways, but it's still very much the same. He can still bring in players from all over.
You've got 3 teams coming up. Burnley, who look to be advancing in discussions over Espanyol very recently. Yep. Lots of articles I read about them trying to sort out a deal with Espanyol. Leeds and Rangers, and they've got the Red Bull minority stakes, so access to so many different areas, and Sunderland with potential to expand. And it looks like they want to as well, with both co-owners close links to Marseille and Monaco. So it's a really... It's entering dangerous territory where the numbers of teams that aren't part of an MCG or don't have some kind of tidy arrangement with another football club are dwindling rapidly. Even Liverpool at the top. I think I read literally in the last few days, Liverpool
Getafe, is it?
Are looking as hard as they can now to conclude something for another club to partner with
as well. Which, scary times, or exciting times if you're into that. It feels very Football Manager, doesn't it? So I do see the appeal on that sort of very Football Managery level. But it's also changing what football clubs are, really. I think, as I said, community institutions built on fan connection, player development. It's difficult to have fan connection to youth players, particularly when they're being farmed out to leagues where you don't even get to see them play until they just emerge again or they're sold. So I think it does make it difficult. And then obviously it sort of warps the competitive integrity of the league as well. So all change. But that'll do for this week. Thanks everyone for joining in. Thanks Jack for coming back. It's been a pleasure. Great to have you back.
The Doom back.
Yeah, we're back, here. Baby. We're going down, guys. You heard it here first. But no, as we say, please come over to the Patreon. There's going to be shed loads of transfer links, I'm sure, now that pre-season's getting underway as of Monday when we record this. The players are back. But there'll be plenty going on there. And as we say, at the very least, we'll be discussing Zion Suzuki and El Hadji Malik Diouf on this week's Extra Time. Teaser, I'm excited about both of them. So if you want to hear why, come and join us. Thanks everyone, and we'll see you next week.